Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine a city plunged into absolute darkness. It is 1884, and the electric light bulb is a novelty yet to conquer the American frontier. The streets of Austin, Texas, are illuminated only by the faint, flickering glow of gas lamps and the pale wash of the moon. Beyond these small pools of light, the shadows are deep, impenetrable, and teeming with secrets. It is in this abyss that a monster is born. Before the world trembled at the name Jack the Ripper, before the Zodiac mocked the police, and before the Golden State Killer stalked the suburbs, there was a phantom in Texas. He moved with the silence of a vapor and struck with the brutality of a butcher. They called him the Midnight Assassin. They called him the Intangible Nemesis. But history remembers him by a name that sends a chill down the spine even a century and a half later: the Servant Girl Annihilator. Tonight, on DCF Investigations, we are opening the dusty, blood-stained files of one of the oldest and most terrifying unsolved serial murder cases in American history. We are going back to a time when forensic science was non-existent, when fingerprints were science fiction, and when a killer could vanish into the night, leaving nothing but a trail of bodies and a city on the verge of total collapse. We will walk the muddy streets of 19th century Austin, dissect the brutal attacks that claimed 8 lives, and explore the chilling theory that this Texas drifter may have crossed the Atlantic to become the most famous killer of all time in Whitechapel, London. To understand the terror that gripped Austin, we must first understand the city itself in the mid-1880s. This was not the sprawling, tech-focused metropolis we know today. It was a city in transition, caught between the lawlessness of the Wild West and the emerging order of the Gilded Age. The population was booming, hovering around 15,000 people. The grandiose state capitol building was under construction, a symbol of Texas's rising power. But beneath this veneer of progress lay deep social stratifications. The scars of the Civil War were still fresh. Reconstruction had ended, but racial tensions remained a palpable undercurrent in daily life. The city was geographically divided, and the domestic lives of its citizens followed a strict hierarchy. Wealthy families lived in large, imposing homes, while their domestic servants, primarily African-American women, lived in small, detached quarters in the backyards or alleyways. These servant quarters were modest, often flimsy structures, separated from the safety of the main house. It was here, in these isolated wooden shacks, that the killer found his hunting ground. He did not have to break into well-secured mansions. He simply had to creep through the alleyways under the cover of the heavy Texas night and step into the lives of the most vulnerable women in the city. The nightmare began on New Year's Eve, 1884. The city was preparing to ring in the new year. But for Mollie Smith, a 25-year-old cook, the night would end in horror. Mollie lived in the backyard of a home on West Pecan Street. She was known to be a hard worker, living a quiet life with her companion, Walter Spencer. In the dead of night, while the city slept, a shadow entered their small room. The attacker did not just want to kill, he wanted to destroy. Walter Spencer was attacked first, bludgeoned with an axe, leaving him critically injured but alive. Mollie was not as fortunate. The intruder dragged her from her bed out into the cold winter night and into the backyard. Her body was found the next morning, mutilated in a way that shocked even the most hardened lawmen of the frontier. She had been struck in the head with an axe, but the killer had also used a sharp object perhaps a knife, to inflict terrible wounds upon her body. One specific detail stood out, a detail that would become a grim signature in the months to come. The killer had mutilated her ear. The police were baffled. In 1884, the concept of a serial killer did not exist. Murders were usually crimes of passion, greed, or drunken brawls. This felt different. It was cold, calculated, and seemingly without motive. Walter Spencer, despite his severe head injuries, survived. But his memory of the attack was hazy. He could offer no description of the assailant, only the sensation of a sudden, violent force in the dark. As was common in the era, suspicion immediately fell on the victim's inner circle. Several arrests were made, particularly targeting African American men who knew Mollie, but no evidence stuck. The police, under immense pressure but lacking any forensic tools, found themselves chasing ghosts. For a few months, the city exhaled. Perhaps this was a singular, tragic event, a domestic dispute gone wrong. But the midnight assassin was merely biding his time, waiting for the shadows to lengthen again. In May 1885, the silence was shattered. Eliza Shelley, another cook, was attacked in her bed. The brutality escalated. Like Mollie Smith, she was struck with an axe. The scene was a chaotic tableau of blood and violence. The killer had entered silently, struck with overwhelming force, and vanished. The similarities were too glaring to ignore. Both victims were African American women working as domestic servants. Both were attacked in their beds. Both were struck with an axe, and both suffered sharp force mutilation. Just weeks later, in late May, the terror struck again. Irene Cross, a servant for a prominent family, was found murdered. The violence inflicted upon her was so severe that it left the investigators trembling. The killer was not just killing. He was expressing a deep, pathological rage. He was using weapons of opportunity found at the scene: axes used for chopping wood, ice picks used for block ice, turning the tools of domestic labor into instruments of death. By the summer of 1885, Austin was a city under siege. The heat was sweltering, but the chill of fear kept windows locked and bolted. The police force, ill-equipped and overwhelmed, tried to increase patrols, but the killer seemed to anticipate their movements. He struck when the moon was hidden, moving through the labyrinth of unpaved alleys that crisscrossed the city. The press began to whip the public into a frenzy. Newspapers across the country picked up the story, dubbing the killer with various monikers. But the fear was local and visceral. In August, another victim, Mary Ramey, was taken. She was only 11 years old. The killer dragged her from her mother's side into a wash house and murdered her. The sheer depravity of killing a child signaled that no one was safe. The pattern was undeniable. Yet the police were powerless. They brought in bloodhounds. They hired private detectives from the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and they rounded up scores of suspects, mostly innocent men who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But every lead turned to dust. The killer left clues, but they were riddles written in blood. He often left the murder weapon at the scene, wiping it clean or leaving it steeped in gore. He left footprints, but they were often barefoot, suggesting he removed his shoes to move silently or perhaps to avoid leaving identifiable boot prints. Some reports mentioned a footprint with a missing toe, a detail that would haunt the investigation for decades. As the year 1885 drew to a close, The tension in Austin was electric. The city council debated installing Moonlight towers, massive structures that would bathe the city in artificial light to eliminate the shadows where the killer hid. While the towers we see in Austin today were installed a decade later, the conversation began in the shadow of these murders. The citizens formed vigilance committees. Men sat on their porches with shotguns, guarding their families. The servant quarters, once quiet retreats, became cages of fear. Many servants refused to sleep in their designated cabins, pleading to sleep on the floors of the main houses for safety. Then came the night that would be etched into the city's history forever. Christmas Eve, 1885. The city was quiet. Families huddled together, hoping the holy night would offer protection. But the midnight assassin did not rest. In a shocking deviation from his previous pattern, the killer crossed the racial divide that defined the city's social structure. Until this point, the killer had targeted African-American servant women. This had led some in the white community to believe, with a grotesque sense of detachment, that the horror was confined to a specific demographic. That illusion of safety was shattered in a single hour. First, he struck the home of Susan Hancock. Susan was a white woman living with her husband. She was attacked in her bed, dragged into the backyard, and murdered with the same horrific brutality as the previous victims. Her husband, who was in the house, claimed to have slept through the attack, a claim that would later bring him under intense scrutiny. While the police were rushing to the Hancock residence, chaos erupted across town. Eula Phillips, a young, beautiful socialite, was attacked in her home. Her husband, James Phillips, was bludgeoned with an axe and left for dead. Eula was dragged into the yard and murdered. The scene was a nightmare. The killer had struck two households, miles apart, within the span of an hour. The coordination, the speed, and the audacity were terrifying. The Christmas Eve murders changed everything. The realization that the killer targeted women, regardless of race or class, sent the city into absolute hysteria. The governor of Texas intervened. A massive reward was posted. The police force was purged and reorganized. The city was placed under a de facto martial law. A curfew was enforced. Saloons were closed. Austin became a ghost town after dark. The investigation that followed was a chaotic mix of desperate police work and vigilante justice. Suspects were dragged in by the dozen. The husbands of the two white victims, Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips, were arrested and charged with the murders of their wives. The police, unable to catch the phantom, turned on the survivors. They theorized that these were copycat crimes, domestic murders disguised as the work of the Servant Girl Annihilator. It was a desperate attempt to close the cases, to show the public that the monster had been caught. But the evidence was flimsy. Both men were eventually cleared, leaving the truth buried. So, who was the Servant Girl Annihilator? Over the last century, historians, criminologists, and armchair detectives have pored over the scant evidence. Let us delve into the most prominent suspects and theories, ranging from the plausible to the conspiratorial. The first and perhaps most compelling suspect is a man named Nathan Elgin. For months, the police had been looking for a man with a missing toe, based on footprints found at several crime scenes. In February 1886, just 2 months after the Christmas Eve Massacre, police were called to a saloon in Austin, where a man was dragging a woman out of a bar and assaulting her. The police arrived, and the man, Nathan Elgin, turned on them in a violent rage. The officers shot and killed him. When the coroner examined Nathan Elgin's body, they made a startling discovery. Elgin was missing a toe on one of his feet. It was a physical match to the footprints that had haunted the investigators for a year. Furthermore, after Nathan Elgin was killed, the Servant Girl Annihilator murders stopped. Completely. There were no more axe attacks, no more midnight mutilations. The timing is almost too perfect to be coincidental. Elgin was a young African-American man who lived in the area and would have been familiar with the layout of the servant quarters. Was he the monster? Many historians today believe he is the most likely culprit. A violent man whose death inadvertently saved the city. However, there is another theory. A theory that connects the dusty streets of Austin to the fog-shrouded alleyways of London. This is the theory that the Servant Girl Annihilator and Jack the Ripper were the same man. At first glance, it sounds like sensational fiction. But when you look at the details, the parallels are unnerving. The Austin murders stopped in early 1886. The Whitechapel murders began in 1888. Both killers targeted women. Both attacks involved extreme overkill and mutilation. Both killers operated at night and vanished without a trace. Proponents of this theory point to a specific suspect, a Malay cook named Maurice. According to records, a cook of Malay origin was working in Austin at the Pearl House Hotel during the time of the murders. He was known to be a rough character, often in trouble with the law. After the Austin murders ceased, this man reportedly left Texas. Years later, George Hutchinson, a witness in the Jack the Ripper case, claimed he saw a man of Jewish or Malay appearance watching the victims in Whitechapel. Could a serial killer have traveled from Texas to London, refining his methods along the way? In Austin, the killer used axes and heavy blunt force, often resulting in messy, chaotic scenes. In London, the Ripper used a knife with surgical precision. Criminologists argue that serial killers evolve. They learn. They perfect their craft. The Austin murders could have been the killer's training ground, a place where he learned how to stalk, how to subdue, and how to evade capture. The transition from the brute force of an axe to the precision of a knife could represent an evolution in his fantasy, a move from destruction to dissection. There is also the running man theory. Some witnesses in Austin described seeing a white man fleeing the scenes of the later murders. This man was described as wearing a slouch hat and a long coat, a description that eerily matches the popular image of Jack the Ripper. Was the Annihilator a wealthy psychopath traveling the world, indulging in his dark urges in different cities? We must also consider the possibility of multiple killers. Was the Servant Girl Annihilator a single individual, or was Austin the victim of a contagion of violence? The police at the time certainly considered this. The copycat theory regarding the Christmas Eve murders suggests that the initial killer inspired others to use the cover of the Midnight Assassin to settle their own scores. However, the consistency of the MO, the specific way the bodies were posed, the type of weapons used, the ear mutilations, suggests a singular, chaotic mind at work. The investigation itself was hampered by the racial prejudices of the time. The police force was all white, and the initial victims were all black. There is a strong argument to be made that if the first victim had been a wealthy white woman, the city's response would have been swifter and more effective. The killer was allowed to operate in the shadows of the servant quarters because, to the powers that be, those lives were less valuable. It was only when the violence spilled over into the white community that the full force of the law was brought to bear. The legacy of the Servant Girl Annihilator is one of shadow and silence. Unlike Jack the Ripper, who became a global phenomenon, the Austin axe murderer has largely faded into obscurity. Perhaps it is because he was never given a catchy name by the press until years later. The term Servant Girl Annihilator was actually coined by the famous author O. Henry, who lived in Austin at the time and worked as a pharmacist. In a letter, he grimly noted the town's panic. But for decades, the killer was simply a ghost story told to frighten children in Texas. Today, if you walk the streets of Austin, you could still see the remnants of that terror. The Moonlight Towers, eventually erected in 1895, still stand as silent sentinels. They are the only surviving system of their kind in the world. While they were built a decade after the murders, they were a direct response to the psychological scar left by the Annihilator. The city had learned that darkness was dangerous. They wanted to banish the night. Modern forensic experts who have reviewed the case files often come back to Nathan Elgin. The missing toe is a piece of physical evidence that is hard to dismiss. In the chaos of the 19th century, with no central database and no communication between precincts, it is easy to see how a connection could be missed. Elgin was killed for an unrelated crime, and the police simply moved on, relieved that the murders had stopped. They didn't need a trial. They needed peace. But without a confession and without DNA, we can never be 100% sure. Was it Elgin? Was it the Malay cook who fled to London? Or was it a man whose name never appeared in any police ledger? A man who lived a long life, hiding his monstrous secret behind a veneer of normalcy? The Servant Girl Annihilator case serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of the past. It exposes the cracks in society where predators hide. It shows us how fear can paralyze a city and how justice can be derailed by prejudice and incompetence. 8 women and men lost their lives or were brutally maimed. Mollie Smith, Eliza Shelley, Irene Cross, Mary Ramey, Gracie Vance, Orange Washington, Susan Hancock, Eula Phillips. These are not just names in a dusty file. They were people with dreams, families, and lives that were stolen in the dark. As we close the file on this century-old mystery, we are left with the unsettling realization that some questions may never have answers. The streets of Austin are bright now, filled with music and life. But look up at the Moonlight Towers the next time you are there. They are beautiful, yes. But they are also tombstones. They are monuments to a fear so deep that a city tried to turn the night into day just to keep the monsters at bay. This has been a deep dive into the abyss with DCF Investigations. We scour the archives to bring you the stories that time has tried to forget. We want to know what you think. Do you believe the Servant Girl Annihilator and Jack the Ripper were the same person? Or does the evidence of the missing toe prove that Nathan Elgin was the butcher of Austin? Let us know your theories in the comments below. The truth is often stranger than fiction, and sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who disappear into the history books, never to be caught. Until next time, stay observant, stay safe, and remember, the shadows are only as deep as you let them be.